You're not the one.
We thought we were running an experiment. We didn't know we were opening a door.
Don't breathe.
I came back, but I'm not sure from where.
What if the real me is still there?
Jo floated through the narrow corridor of the orbital space station, her tether gently tugging at her as she adjusted the camera to show Alice and Magnus her surroundings. Earth curved in the distance, silent and blue. Her daughter's small voice crackled through the connection, asking questions about the stars, the ship, Captain Paul. Jo smiled, holding up the camera so Alice could see Paul assembling a strange device in the center of the lab. He worked carefully, following instructions from Henry Caldera, the scientist on Earth who had designed the experiment. Henry's voice came through, calm and methodical, guiding Paul through each step. The device was built to detect a theoretical new state of matter, something unstable, unexplored. Henry sounded confident, but no one on board really understood what they were about to unleash. Then everything went wrong. An alert blared. A shock rocked the station as something collided with it. Hard. Jo instinctively grabbed for the wall, watching debris drift by outside the viewport. The lights flickered and the connection to Earth snapped off. For a few seconds, they were blind, cut off from the world below. Fire alarms triggered. Smoke curled in the cabin. Paul screamed. His hand was caught in one of the closing hatches. The crew scrambled to help, but the damage was too severe. Amid the chaos, they made a grim decision. They had to amputate to save his life. Blood floated in small globs. The smell of metal and burnt insulation filled the cabin. One of the Soyuz escape ships, Soyuz 2, was still functional, but Soyuz 1 had taken the brunt of the damage. Jo volunteered to check the extent of the damage from the outside. In her suit, tethered to the station, she made her way toward the power systems. She radioed updates as she moved. Severe structural damage, panels torn loose, solar arrays crippled. Back on Earth, Alice and Magnus, now at Roscosmos Cosmodrome in Baikonur, watched helplessly. They could hear her voice, but the video was gone. Jo's calm tone did little to soothe their worry. Then Jo stopped speaking for a moment. She had spotted something drifting nearby. At first, she thought it was just debris. But as she floated closer, she saw the shriveled corpse of a woman in an orange USSR-era spacesuit. The suit bore insignia long out of use. The body had been what collided with the station. It wasn't possible. No mission from that era had been anywhere near their orbit. Jo reached for the body, but it slipped away, floating slowly into space. Her partner inside the station pulled her back just in time. She described what she saw, her voice shaking. Irene, head of Roscosmos, heard the report and went quiet. Back inside, the attempt to save Paul failed. His body lay motionless as CPR was stopped. The crew was ordered to evacuate. Jo was told to remain behind, to repair Soyuz 1 and retrieve the experiment if she could. Before they left, she handed off a small necklace, Alice's, asking one of the crew to take care of her daughter. She watched them seal the hatch and leave. Joe was alone. She entered the damaged Soyuz 1, running only on solar power. In one of the seats sat Paul's body, strapped in, lifeless. She found the necklace tangled in his suit and took it back. While waiting for the sunlight to return to power the system, she drew the astronaut's suit she had seen and sent the sketch to the command center. Strange things started happening. Time passed too quickly, like it was skipping forward. She blinked and the sky changed. When daylight came, she exited the pod and began repairing the batteries. She worked methodically, pushing back the rising unease crawling through her mind. Henry argued with Irene on Earth. She wanted to leave the experiment behind, believing it had caused the disaster, but Henry insisted Joe retrieve it. He was convinced the discovery was too important. Meanwhile, the crew of Soyuz 2 landed safely. Joe was still up there. Communication was weak, failing in and out. Just as Magnus and Alice were about to see her, the video feed went black. Alone, exhausted, Joe hallucinated. She saw Alice's necklace in a cupboard that couldn't exist. Panic surged through her. She tried to regain composure and focused on the repairs. Finally, she got the ship powered. A voice echoed through the system, a slow, familiar voice. "Paul's," he whispered. "Don't breathe." She froze. She entered the ship and in a flickering moment saw Paul alive. She reached for him, but her hand clutched only the amputated limb he had lost before his death. She staggered back. The voice was gone. With the shuttle systems online, a recorded message played, warning her there wasn't much time left. It reminded her she had to bring the experiment home. She found the device still intact, tucked it securely, and returned to the cockpit. Henry arranged a last-minute rescue mission, but Irene doubted it was needed. The command center believed Joe had likely died. She calculated the deorbit sequence, set the return parameters, and sent one final message to her family. The launch failed. Automatic detachment wouldn't trigger from inside the ship. From Earth, they watched the timer run out. Joe was presumed lost. A quiet prayer was said. Alice and Magnus held each other, grief blooming. Then something impossible happened. A figure appeared, shadowed, indistinct. It helped launch the shuttle. Joe stared out the window, seeing it beside her. She detached from the station and began the terrifying descent. The command center got a ping. Joe was entering Earth's atmosphere. They scrambled to respond. Her voice came through the static. They had her. She landed in a remote location. Soldiers found her inside the pod, disoriented but alive. As they helped her out, she was reunited with Magnus and Alice. In the helicopter, Joe held Alice's hand. For a moment, both of them hallucinated. The ship empty, one another missing. Joe blinked, the vision gone. She started speaking Swedish, panicked. No one understood her. She closed her eyes, exhausted. But she was home. At least, that's what it seemed like. Joe stood under the pale hospital lights, blinking at the earth beneath her feet. Everything was still. Everything was supposed to be familiar. But it wasn't. The air smelled wrong. The colors were muted. She was home, they said. She had survived. Yet nothing around her felt like it had before. Alice ran into her arms, warm and alive. and Joe held her too tightly. Magnus stood a few feet back, unsure, as if waiting to see who had really returned from space. They flew home together in a military helicopter, cutting through the sky above frozen fields. Joe watched the ground, quiet, Alice asleep against her shoulder. But even in the silence, her mind raced. At home, Joe tried to settle back in. She cooked dinner with Magnus. They sat at the table like they used to. Alice laughed at something on the television, but when Joe reached out to take Magnus's hand, he hesitated, pulled back slightly. Joe said nothing, pretending not to notice. She felt the distance between them, like a crack that hadn't been there before. That night, Alice called for Magnus in her sleep, and he went to her without hesitation. Joe stayed in the kitchen, her hand still reaching for something that wasn't there. She began taking daily pills given to her by the agency. Vitamins, they said. Necessary after space travel. She didn't ask questions. She didn't tell anyone she had started seeing things. At a press conference, Joe sat beside officials and engineers, offering condolences to Paul's widow. She spoke about her time in space, how much she had missed Earth, how it had felt to be truly alone. When the event ended, she approached the woman privately to express sympathy. "Erica," she said softly. The woman corrected her. "My name is Frida." Joe paused, confused. She was sure the name had been Erica. She could see it in her memory, clear as anything else. Had it changed? Meanwhile, Henry was back in his lab, demonstrating the results of the experiment to his team. He showed them data, unstable, shifting forms, but one assistant argued that these effects could only happen in space. The matter, whatever it was, reacted differently under observation. Henry disagreed, convinced that something had been discovered. Something in between. Something that refused to show itself until seen. Bud, Henry's twin brother, spoke at a convention. He talked about the stigma of being Henry's brother, about the mission that had failed, about how people believed things that weren't real. Joe saw clips of the event. His bitterness was sharp. She felt a flicker of recognition she couldn't place. Back at Baikonur, a commission began investigating the incident in orbit. They reviewed video footage, telemetry, collision data. Joe sat in front of them, explaining what she had seen. The corpse in the orange USSR suit, the collision, the hallucinations. The officials exchanged looks. One of them asked if she had been checking her oxygen levels. Did she feel any signs of hypoxia? She answered plainly. No symptoms, before or after. She remembered everything. She knew what she saw. They wrote it down but didn't believe her. Later, at home, she sat on the couch with Magnus again. He was quiet, kind, patient, but distant. When she reached for his hand this time, he let her. He held her fingers gently. She told him she loved him. He kissed her cheek. That night, as the snow fell, Alice played outside. Henry joined her, kneeling in the snow with her bunny toy beside them. He spoke about something called Schrödinger's cat. How in quantum theory a particle could exist in two forms at once, black in one world, white in another. And in the space between those states, it was both, unresolved, until someone looked at it. He told Alice he had invented a device to observe that in-between state, that the substance they had sent into space didn't want to decide what it was. Not until someone forced it to be one thing. Not until they returned. Inside, Joe stared into the mirror. She didn't recognize her own eyes. She asked Magnus, "Do I seem different to you?" He looked at her carefully. "You do," he said, "but maybe that's normal." The doorbell rang. When she opened it, Henry stood there with Alice beside him. He thanked her for bringing the experiment back, officially introduced himself, as if they'd never met. She stared at him. "I remember you," she said slowly. He had been part of the Apollo mission. She was certain. He nodded. People change when they go to space. It happens to all of us. We just have to take care of ourselves now. They all headed to Memorial Alley, a line of trees planted by astronauts past. Joe held up the sketch she had made, the orange suit, the woman she'd seen in orbit. One of the engineers examined it, pointing at the insignia. "That's Irina," he said casually. Joe's heart dropped. Irina, the head of Roscosmos, the woman who had heard her story. She couldn't be the one in the suit. That was impossible. Later, at Paul's tree, Joe asked for a moment alone. She placed flowers gently at its base. She whispered his name. Then something flickered in the corner of her eye. Paul stood before her, silent, unreal. He said softly, "My heart is still hanging in space." She didn't move. She didn't speak. Then he was gone. In front of the commission again, Joe sat still as they told her the station was hit by an orange garbage bag. They were confident. That was the official explanation. Joe stared at the panel of officials and said, "Maybe you're right." She retracted her previous statement. She agreed. It might have been a bag. Back at the house, she looked around. Everything was in its place. Yet something felt wrong. She asked Magnus about the car parked outside. "It was red," she said. "Wasn't it?" He looked at her strangely. "It's always been blue." She went quiet. Everything around her was the same. But nothing was. And she wasn't sure which version of herself had come home. Night pressed down hard on the highway. Joe drove in silence, her hands tight around the steering wheel. The road stretched ahead like a tunnel through blackness, lit only by the car's beams. In the back seat, Alice stared out the window, her stuffed bunny held close. The radio fizzed with static before a woman's voice cut through, soft, calm, speaking Russian. Alice leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's she saying?" Joe didn't answer at first. Her throat felt tight. The voice was familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. Finally, she said, "She's saying the world is turning upside down." As if summoned, flashing lights appeared behind them. A police car. Joe's grip tightened. The device hidden beneath the passenger seat began to blink with a low, steady pulse. Her heartbeat matched it. She kept her eyes on the mirror. The cruiser stayed behind them for an agonizing minute before veering off at the next exit. Joe exhaled, trying not to show how shaken she was. Eventually, they reached a small cabin nestled in the woods. Snow had begun to fall, soft flakes catching in the headlights. Inside, the air was cold and stale, like the place hadn't been touched in years. Joe lit a fire while Alice curled up on the couch, listening to a bedtime story through an old tape player. The room warmed slowly, but Joe's thoughts didn't. When Alice was distracted, Joe stepped outside to check on the blinking device. She crouched in the snow, brushing it off, watching the pulsing light. Something about it had changed, its rhythm slightly off, like it was listening. A scream pierced the quiet. Joe bolted inside. Alice was lying on the floor, unmoving. Joe rushed to her, panic rising, but when she touched her daughter, Alice stirred, asleep and unharmed. Confused, Joe looked around the cabin. Nothing was out of place. She stood up, trying to steady her breathing. Then the scream came again. From outside this time, Joe turned toward the sound and ran. The forest was a maze of shadows and cold. Joe pushed through branches, following the voice. "Alice," she yelled, "where are you?" No answer, only wind. She stumbled through the snow, deeper into the trees, until she reached another cabin. Smaller, older, a mirror image of the first. She stepped inside. The air was colder here. Inside a cupboard, she found a pale, sickly version of Alice, curled up and shivering. Joe lifted her out, wrapping her in a coat, whispering reassurances. She carried her back to the original cabin, heart hammering. Inside, she ran a hot bath and placed the new Alice in the tub. She boiled more water in the kitchen, trying to stay calm. Then she heard a sound behind her and turned. The first Alice, the one she had tucked in, the one she thought was asleep, was lying in bed. Joe's blood turned to ice. She rushed back to the bathroom. The tub was empty. She turned slowly. Behind her stood the second Alice, but something about her eyes was wrong. Too distant, too still. Joe blacked out. When she woke up, it was morning. Time had passed, hours maybe. She lay on the couch, her limbs heavy. Across the room, Alice sat by the fire, quiet, looking down at her bunny. Joe stood, still dizzy, and realized she had no idea how long she'd been unconscious. Somewhere else, Henry met with Irene, telling her rescue gear had been dispatched for Soyuz 1, but Irene doubted they would need it. No signs of life had been reported. Back in space, in memory or something else, Joe worked alone. She fixed what she could. The hallucinations continued. Paul whispering to her through recordings, his voice telling her not to breathe. The strange physics of the station warped her perception. Objects shifted, clocks misbehaved. The past bled into the present. Henry's twin, Bud, far from all of it, gave an interview. A journalist pressed him about the mission. He snapped, his anger bubbling up before he shut it down. She'd mistaken him for Henry. Again. The identity between them always blurring. Bud looked like Henry, sounded like him, but wasn't him. That difference mattered more to Bud than anyone realized. On Earth, Joe lit up the lights of Soyuz 1. She finished setting the deorbit path. She took the experiment with her. The capsule detached. A figure, impossible, shadowed, appeared and helped. No one could explain how or who. Joe stared out during re-entry and saw it next to her in the ship. It didn't speak. It only watched. Now, in the present, Joe looked at Alice. The fire crackled, melting the edges of her memories. She could feel them overlapping again. She asked Alice to pack. They had to leave. "We need to find the other you," she said. Alice blinked. "What do you mean?" "She's still out there. She'll freeze if we don't find her." They left the cabin, heading into the snow. Alice made a trail behind them, dragging a stick so they wouldn't get lost, but Joe scolded her for it. She didn't trust the trail. She didn't trust anything. Alice trudged beside her, quiet. Then she said softly, "Sometimes when people are really upset, they see things that aren't there. Maybe the other cabin wasn't real." Joe stopped, kneeled in the snow, looked at Alice and whispered, "I don't think I'm your mother." Alice's face hardened. She didn't ask if it was a joke. She already knew. "Then who is?" Alice demanded. Joe had no answer. She looked away, and they kept walking, searching for someone neither of them could explain. Joe and Alice moved through the snow, their shapes small against the vast white. The sky was gray, heavy with silence. Each step felt slower, heavier, as if gravity was different here. Joe glanced sideways at the girl beside her, walking without complaint, dragging her stick behind her to mark a trail neither of them would follow back. She no longer knew what she was searching for. Alice broke the silence. "You don't really think she's out here, do you?" Joe didn't answer right away. "I saw her. You said you're not my mother." Her voice was steady but too calm for her age. "So who am I to you?" Joe stopped walking. She turned, snow crunching beneath her boots, and looked down at Alice, the girl who was hers and not hers. Her eyes, her face, the weight of her questions. "I don't know," Joe said. "I thought I did. You still won't tell me the truth. I'm not sure I know it anymore." They stood in the open, wind beginning to pick up around them, the forest now behind them, like a memory that had been erased. 5 weeks earlier, the station had been chaos. Joe had recorded a message, her voice trembling as she told Alice she loved her, told Magnus to keep going. She'd seen things that couldn't be explained. Paul's voice had echoed from the ship's systems, warning her to hurry, warning her not to breathe. And then the figure, silent, unreal, had appeared and helped her launch. No one could explain how she made it home. On Earth, things never settled. At the commission hearing, Joe had stared straight ahead as they repeated their conclusion. Debris from a decades-old satellite, maybe an orange garbage bag. An accident, tragic, but meaningless. Joe said nothing. Then she nodded. Maybe they were right. The dead woman in the USSR suit, the voice in the static, the time gaps, the feeling of being observed, none of it belonged to a world that wanted to be understood. Later at home, Joe wandered from room to room. The floorboards creaked in the wrong places. The bedroom window looked out onto a street she didn't recognize. The car in the driveway was blue. It had always been red. She asked Magnus, but he insisted it had never changed. He looked at her now with gentle suspicion, the kind given to people who'd come back changed. Not broken, but not the same. That night she clung to him in bed, told him she loved him, that she remembered everything. He didn't say it back. In the yard, Alice swung slowly on the old swing. Henry appeared beside her, calm as always. He spoke about particles, black in one world, white in another. Between them, he said, is a space where the particle is both. Neither one thing nor the other. It's waiting to be seen. Joe had been that particle. Was still. She began to wonder if she had returned to the right version of Earth, or if there even was a right one anymore. At Memorial Alley, Joe showed the crew a sketch of the woman she saw in space. One of them looked closely and said, without hesitation, "That's Irina." Joe stared at them, her mouth open, trying to speak. It couldn't be. Irina was alive. Irina had been the one coordinating the mission, but the face in the sketch was hers. A perfect match, as if the woman Joe found floating, dead in space, had never left. Reality split again, just slightly, enough to let in doubt, enough to make everything shake. Joe returned home, but it didn't feel like a return. It felt like trespassing. She reached for Magnus's hand at the dinner table. He pulled away gently, eyes on Alice. Later that night, as Alice played hide and seek, she ran into the shadows chasing something. She saw her bunny toy stomped on, heard laughter, but when she looked up, no one was there. At the next hearing, Joe stood before the commission and quietly agreed with their version of events. She repeated it. Space debris, a freak collision, hallucinations from low oxygen, nothing out of the ordinary. She didn't believe it. Not really. But she couldn't keep fighting something no one else could see. Frederick, her former supervisor, approached her after. He tried to touch her face the way he must have done once before. She pulled away, confused, watching his expression shift into something wounded. He whispered, "You don't remember us." She didn't. She couldn't. That night, she told Magnus everything about the double Alices, about the moment in the woods, about the girl in the tub and the other one in bed. "I think I brought the wrong one back," she whispered. He didn't flinch. He helped her undress gently, as if helping a patient. They held each other desperately, the way people do when they know it might be the last time they feel something real. Somewhere else, Bud stood on a ship, talking to Ian, the author who had questioned the official story. Bud raged, and in a flash of anger, Ian was gone, tossed from the edge, swallowed by the dark sea. Henry watched from afar, seeing visions of his own dead body reflected in the glass. Nothing held still anymore. In the morning, Joe packed everything. Alice stood by the door, holding her bunny. "We need to go," Joe said. "We need to find her." "Find who?" Alice asked, tired. "There's no one else." Joe looked at her. "I don't think I'm your mother," she said again, quietly. Alice didn't move. She didn't argue. They walked together through the snow. Joe no longer knew what was real, but she knew something had torn, something had been opened, and she had crossed through. At the edge of the woods, where the trees grew thinner and the sky opened wider, Joe turned toward the wind and listened. Somewhere out there, another Alice might be calling, and this time Joe wasn't sure she wanted to be found.